welcome to the latest moments of the Brian Kilmeade Show. I hope you had a fantastic weekend. We're going to have a fantastic hour and a fantastic show. Why? If you're watching Fox Nation, you can tell. It's the day before the launch. We're privileged to have with us the former Secretary of State, Congressman from Kansas, and CIA Director Mike Pompeo in studio. West Point grad, has already served the country, finished #1 in his class, and defines himself as a grinder. Right? In other words, you'll outwork anyone.
Yeah, Brian, thanks for having me on. It's been great fun to write this book. We called it Never Give an Inch because America is worth fighting for. It's the America that we all love. I've always in my life been taught you may not be the smartest person, you may not be the best looking person, but if you outwork them, if you're prepared to stay focused on the mission, you can get a lot accomplished. And we did that for 4 years.
So just leading up to 2016, you were for Rubio. You're a congressman from Kansas, fresh off the Benghazi hearing, which you didn't like the final outcome.
I didn't like the outcome. She had classified documents. We're back in the classified document, right? Here's Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of State, got high-level classified documents on her server in New York, on her BlackBerry. Nothing happens.
When you started investigating Benghazi, because the Secretary of State, obviously there was something wrong there that allowed our guys to get killed and our embassy to be overrun. We still haven't gotten to the bottom of it. And a lot of people say, well, I watched over the weekend Senator Dick Durbin come out and say, well, these Republicans tend to overshoot, hence Benghazi. Tell us about that process, because I think that you didn't like the final report that was out either, right?
I didn't like the final report. Actually, the final report was okay, but it didn't tell the full story. So Jim Jordan and I wrote a separate report. You can go see it. And I write about this in my book. We wanted to make sure the American people knew that there didn't have to be the case that there was an American ambassador killed in Libya and that we might have saved a couple of other lives. There were 4 men killed that day in Benghazi, Libya. I served on that committee. And Jim Jordan and I worked diligently to get all the facts for the American people so they could lay out crystal clear what America could have done to preserve its own interests. And, Brian, it comes back to my time as Secretary of State, right? She was a Secretary of State. And then who would have dreamed when I'm on the Benghazi committee, I'd become Secretary of State? And in the book, I talk about how every day I thought about making sure my officers in the field who were on freedom's frontier were as safe and secure as I could make them. Even though we were going to take on risk, I was determined not to let something like that happen again, and it didn't.
We still don't have all the answers, right?
No, we still don't have all the answers precisely what happened, but we've got a pretty good picture of how Washington dawdled while the folks on the ground in Benghazi, Libya were fighting for their very lives. The movie 13 Hours talks about for half a day, Washington, D.C. just kind of hung out, kind of thought it was over. And these guys were fighting for their lives on the rooftops of a CIA annex. That's just unacceptable when Washington fails our leaders.
You end up, when you become Secretary of State, you tried to talk to as many people as possible. One of the people that you called who picked up was Hillary Clinton.
She did.
She gave you good advice, right?
She gave me good advice. And she was very generous that day. She was kind. All of the former secretaries were kind, trying to help me think about how to be successful. So I appreciate the fact that in that moment, at least, everyone came together around something that's bigger than any of us, and that's the country. And
I'm not sure what the point of the investigation was at that time, but she was at the center of the Russian ruse that really plagued the first 2.5 years of the job that you were doing internationally, made everyone seem as though this guy was going to be impeached and you're going to be disempowered, made it harder. CIA director made it harder. The public distrust grew on something that happened because of her.
All of that is very true. And I knew some of that when I was talking to her. I didn't know all of it at that point in time. I didn't know the whole history of that dossier at that point in time. But make no mistake about it. And I write about this in Never Give an Inch. On January 6th, everybody talks about January 6th. I write about January 6th, 2017. January 6th, 2017. January 6th, 2017, I get a call that says, come to Trump Tower. There's going to be a meeting. That meeting, Jim Comey, head of the FBI, John Brennan, head of CIA, and Jim Clapper, head of the DNI, basically tell President Trump he's a Russian asset based on this Steele dossier and a few other little tidbits of information. We of course know they were wrong about that. I knew it at the time, but we could begin to see, and it hurt our ability to secure America. It made it harder for the Trump administration to do our job.
President-elect.
He was a president-elect at this time. This was a couple of weeks before the.
And what are you thinking when you're sitting there?
Look, I'm congressman from Kansas at this point. I'm not even the CIA director.
On the Intelligence Committee.
I'm the nominee. I'm on the Intelligence Committee. I was actually brought up there because I had a clearance. I was one of the few people that could actually go read the high-end TS level, top secret level report that they were going to told us they were going to hand the president. So I went and read it, and then I took it on. When I became CIA director, I took this on. I tried to get to the bottom of it. And as I write in the book, you can see that John Brennan had deeply politicized the analytical process. The analysts had actually done their work, but he bypassed the normal analytic process to get to the outcome he was looking for.
And do you think that Comey really believed the dossier, that really believed this information that Trump had sold out because of some crazy relationship he had in business?
It seems unimaginable to me. We know pretty early on they came to know it wasn't true. They came to know that there were connections, that there were folks working inside the FBI who were connected to Elias and the Clinton campaign. That they came to know that any senior FBI official would have known danger, and yet they pushed on. And Adam Schiff goes out and tells this story to the public for a year and a half. He says there's more coming. Of course, we all know now nothing ever came. He told the story knowing it was false, and that is despicable. I'm glad that McCarthy has taken him off the committee.
I mean, it's unbelievable he's getting a pass on this. He also just lied about Trump's taxes. You're not going to believe what's in his taxes. There's nothing in his taxes that people can understand. They're more complicated than we can imagine. But for people in real estate, high-end real estate, they say that's exactly what happens.
Of course.
So I want to bring you to a moment that you are critical of the former president. And this is after a meeting in Helsinki, they have a joint press conference, which, by the way, Joe Biden was sure to not do after his meeting. He had him by himself, and he still snapped at one reporter. Cut 32.
So I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today. And what he did is an incredible offer. He offered to have the people working on the case come and work with their investigators with respect to the 12 people. I think that's an incredible offer.
And you didn't think so?
No, not helpful. The offer was Vladimir Putin at his worst, right? His evil worst. He had no intention of being constructive for the United States of America. He wanted to undermine our democracy, something he's wanted for a long time.
And you as in heading the intelligence.
And I was CIA director at the time, and so the president's statement just made life more complicated. It didn't have to be the case that you bought into, and this was the two thoughts you had to hold in your head. The Steele dossier and the Russia hoax were exactly that, a hoax. But it was also the case that the Intelligence Committee had gotten the analytic piece of this right, that there were Russian bots, that in fact the Russians have tried to influence our election since at least the early 1980s, and President Trump didn't walk that line that day in a way that was useful to us.
You said that you got along with the president because you always dealt with him honestly. Did you tell him how you felt?
I did. He asked me about it, oh goodness, a couple of weeks later, and I said, there were so many other answers you could have given, right, in response. He was asked a sharp question, but we've all been at this a long time. The media is trying to do exactly what they did to him that day, and they were trying to create a wedge, frankly, a wedge between me and him, between the intelligence community and him, and unfortunately he took the bait that day and made it harder, made all of our jobs a little bit more difficult, and we should never let the media do that.
And you made it clear when the vetting process, when you went to meet him in Trump Tower, he's like, Mike, you're wrong on Russia. Right?
I think it may have been the first words he ever said to me in my life.
You're wrong on Russia.
I had
you didn't even know him.
I had never met President Trump until the moment I walked into his office that morning to interview to be CIA director. And he may have said hello, but I think his first words were, Mike, how come you're so wrong on Russia? And we had a lively conversation about how we ought to proceed on Russia. Then we covered the rest of the world as well.
But there was things he was tough on Russia. Do you believe that they invade Ukraine or even threaten Ukraine by encircling the country with troops if you guys are there?
It Never Give an Inch talks about how we stop this. You don't give an inch. You don't talk about minor incursions, right? You don't say, oh my gosh, you just disrupted America's gasoline pipelines for 3 days. No problem. We're not going to do anything to you. No, we were incredibly tough. We were respectful. We understood that Vladimir Putin had real power. He had nuclear weapons, but we made sure energy prices were low. That hurt his economy. We were the first ones to provide defensive weapon systems to the Ukrainians. People forget this. They think about Russia and Trump, and we provided defensive weapon systems. We had to convince the president that was the right thing to do, but it was at that time. No, I don't think there's any chance that Vladimir Putin would have done this if we were still there. And my best evidence of that is that he didn't. For 4 years, he did not.
Right. And do you think if we don't leave Afghanistan the way we did, he doesn't feel as though he has a shot at taking that country?
I think that's exactly right. Those are deeply connected ideas. Remember, there's no doubt President Trump wanted out of Afghanistan, right? I tell you how many times I walk in the office and Mike, and I write in the book, Mike, get out of there. And we were working our way towards it. We got from 15,000 to a little more than 2,000 by the time we left. But we didn't do what Biden did. We didn't abandon America's interest there
and leave
get 13 Americans killed, billions of dollars worth of equipment, and a debacle on the world stage, which makes America look weak even to this day.
You looked at, we had to get our retired guys to still get our people, our allies, and our citizens out. Retired guys that go into action, empty their bank accounts.
Absolutely. And by the way, thank you to each of them that did that, that took time from their lives. It's an amazing story of American heroism, getting these folks out. These weren't folks getting paid. They were doing it because of love of country.
All right. I want you to, some other points in your book, I'll just bring you to one right now. There's no doubt about it. People look at you and as a legitimate presidential contender. If you look at your resume, why not? Number one at West Point, a very consequential congressman who landed on the Intelligence Committee, did some important investigations, has the ear of most conservatives. Whether you like it or not, they like you. And then you become the CIA director, and then you become Secretary of State. You leave office in both positions unscathed with the respect of all the people on the Trump loyalists, and you don't hate people that hate Trump. So you did both, so you're a legitimate contender. So I asked the president about this on our show, Cut 33. How would you handle running against people in your cabinet like Pompeo, Nikki Haley, Mike Pence?
Well, many of them have said they would never run if I run, so we'll see whether or not that turns out to be true. I think it would be very disloyal if they did, but that's okay, too.
So you've heard that before?
I have heard that before. I never said I wouldn't run. It doesn't matter who else gets in the race. Susan and I are praying and thinking about whether to get in the race. In a book, and Never Give An Inch, I talk about how you should focus on the things that matter to America. It's not about me. It's not about Donald Trump. It's not about any of these other people. It's about, can you deliver for America? And when the president talks about being disloyal, I think he just misunderstands. The loyalty is to your obligation to the country. It's your duty to the nation. I worked for President Trump. I am proud of the work that I did for President Trump. But the focus of my mission every day was to do what he told the American people he would do and deliver for the country. And so, goodness, if there's a big campaign with lots of folks to get in the race, everyone should bring it, make their best arguments, and let the American people sort it all out.
Right. You'd have to take them on in things that you might have not done before, publicly be critical. There's never been a debate amongst people in their own party, Democrat or Republican, where you don't have to go at each other.
It'll be awkward, but it'll also be enlightening for the American people. They'll get to see who each of us is. They'll get to see who each of the candidates are, and they'll get a really good feel. And I think the American people can sort it all out. I have enormous confidence in them.
One thing he said about you, he's like, President Xi hates you.
He does hate me. It's the closest I came to ever getting fired, I think. It's the best I could tell.
Because?
Goodness.
I think it was about the COVID virus.
It was about the COVID virus. It was the beginning of 20. I was on a phone call with President Trump and President Xi. I'm sure the Chinese foreign minister was on the call, too. The story is detailed in the book, Never Give an Inch. And Xi just comes at me full throttle. He says, this guy's saying nasty things about me. He is going to undermine our relationship. And most importantly, he basically threatened the president, said, if you don't shut Pompeo up, we won't give you the PPE you need, the equipment that we needed while people were suffering from COVID.
They say goodbye to the trade one deal.
Yeah, goodbye to the phase one trade deal. And so phone call ends with Xi. President calls me back, and it's quite a funny story. He says, that guy, I won't use the adjective on your show, but that guy effing hates you. I said, yes, Mr. President, I think he does.
That's at the top of my resume. Thank you very much. What are these leaders actually like? What about Kim Jong-un? What about Dennis Rodman? Was he actually beneficial in helping disseminate what North Korea is all about? The answer might surprise you. It's all in Mike Pompeo's book, and most importantly, the day before his launch, he chose to come here. Don't move.
He's so busy, he'll make your head spin. It's Brian Kilmeade.
We have lost the last 7 out of 8 popular votes for president. 7 out of 8 Republicans have lost. Something's wrong. And so I think it's time that we bring in a new generation that can bring in more people to our party, that can really talk about the solutions that we need to go. If I run, I'm running against Joe Biden. That's what I'm focused on, because we can't have a second term of Joe Biden.
That is Nikki Haley last week laying the groundwork. What I believe it'll be a run. Mike Pompeo here. There's not a conversation that happens where people don't say that Mike Pompeo, like Tim Scott, like Nikki Haley, like Ron DeSantis, like Governor Hutchinson, they don't come up. How do you feel about her philosophy? Is she ready to endorse you? Because you are a new generation and you are younger.
I'm a little older than her, I think. I don't know. I don't know so much about a new generation. We need to make sure that we get the ideas right. It's going to take a determined president. It's a long march. I saw the State Department, the deep state understates the problem set there. They don't want to do what conservatives want them to do. It's going to take 8 years of determined work to fix the Justice Department, the Department of Education, State Department. It's going to take every bit of that.
But can you believe, so you're a conservative, no doubt about it. Forget about what you even did as cabinet secretary in life. But yet, if most of the country is in the middle, do you think you have to change the message to get more than just conservative Republicans? If you can't get moderates and some Democrats, moderate Democrats, you can't win. Does that mean Mike Pompeo has got to say, okay, I got to do what's going to get me get a win?
You got to stay who you are. This is what I write about, never give an inch. You better know who you are when you become president of the United States. That's what I saw up close. No, you don't have to change a thing. I believe that the philosophy, we call it conservatism, call it whatever you want. This philosophy about how America works, our central institutions, life, liberty, and the pursuit of justice, these basic ideas are Judeo-Christian heritage. I think this spans a large piece of the American landscape. Some of them register as Democrats, some as independents, or in my home state, they put a U next to the name unaffiliated. I think those people understand what's good for America. The fact that we didn't have such a good election in November just breaks my heart. It's time to start winning again, and I think these ideas will appeal to a broad cross-section so long as we speak to them from our heart.
So you didn't have the red wave, barely got the House, and you lost a seat in the Senate.
Yep.
So what do you learn from that?
You can't look in the rearview mirror, and you can't just tweet. You have
But you do after action reports.
The lesson is the candidates who were successful presented an articulate, forward-looking vision for what they want for America. This is what I want it to look like, and this is how I'm going to go do it. They didn't just badmouth Joe Biden or their opponent. They talked about if you elect me, here are the 5 things I'm going to go do. And those folks succeeded. And the folks who said, we got messed with in the 2020 election, and these folks are bad. If that was just your message, you didn't get the voters you needed.
Obviously, nobody really wants to hear about 2020 anymore, but abortion is big. What's your message on abortion, being that you're so pro-life?
I never waver from my commitment to protecting every unborn baby. I think the American people can come to understand that this battle will now move to the 50 states. I worked for a good part of my life to get Roe overturned. It was an incredibly important day. It was the right day as a constitutional matter and for the unborn. We'll keep working on this. It's incredibly contentious.
But 40% of the country agrees with you, 60 don't.
That's right. But I was able, when I ran for Congress in Kansas, there were a lot of folks who would have had a very different view from me on that particular issue, but I was able to talk to them, have thoughtful conversations, and engage them.
All right. So the former Secretary of State's book is now out. You see Mike Pompeo here for another half hour. Don't move. Never give an inch.
That is true that there were people trying to get rid of Mike Pence off the ticket. I also thought it was so naive from some of the political novices, like Jared Kushner that I worked with in the White House, to actually think, well, let's just get rid of the vice president. This whole idea, let's just get a woman, get a woman, get a woman. You know who did that? One Joe Biden. And look what we got for it. Goodness, Kamala Harris. So I'm glad Secretary Pompeo has said this.
So, Mr. Secretary, Mike Pompeo is here. Never Give an Inch, name of his book. It's out officially tomorrow. You can order it now. Mr. Secretary, your thoughts about what Kellyanne said. She said there was a move afoot, and you wrote about that to get Mike Pence off the ticket. When was it? How'd you hear about it?
Yeah. First of all, I wasn't involved in it. I wasn't doing politics. I wasn't involved in the political process. If you'd asked me...
One thing you like Mike Pence.
Yeah, and I like Mike Pence. And by the way, it would have been politically a bad idea. And as I reflect back on it now, my problem and the reason I wrote about this was that one of the challenges we had in the Trump administration is you had people working for President Trump who weren't on the team.
I know.
Who were about themselves, and they thought they were more important than America. And with respect to Ambassador Haley, that's what I saw that day. When Chief Kelly called me and told me that it happened, it's like, oh my gosh, we've had this problem before. We need everyone putting their oar in the water going the same direction. So for me, this wasn't about politics. This was about mission. This was about delivering on behalf of President Trump and America. And I thought what Ambassador Haley was doing that day just was disconnected from that.
So you think she was making the move to be the replacement? She initiated it?
I don't have any idea. But when you're with the President of the United States and you're the Secretary of State or the CIA director or an ambassador, you should be spending every second talking to them about how you're going to deliver on behalf of the in Ambassador Haley's case, on behalf of America's efforts at the United Nations, to be focused on anything else is just the wrong approach. You have, there's so much noise in Washington, Brian. You've seen this. There's so much noise. And this is what I write about in the book. If you give an inch, if you give the media just 1 inch, they will drive a truck through it. And when you lose focus on mission, that's what happens.
See, I in reading Kushner's book, and I know people are critical of him, I'm not. I think he did an incredible thing, and he thought he was going to be arrested any day because he was wrongly put in the middle of this scandal. I know he had a great respect for you.
Yeah, I worked great with Jared.
Right.
Yeah.
And so people are going back and forth. What I found interesting about your relationship is that for the most part, Kelly didn't seem to respect Trump. And coming from the military background, a lot of times, but you have a military background too. And Esper is another guy with a military background who you graduated with.
Yeah, he's a classmate of mine.
So Esper did not respect the president, in my view. Kelly did not respect the president. You like both of them. Did you try to convince them to get aboard and say, just understand they're different than you, but he can be effective? Did you try to?
Absolutely. I used every tool that I had, everything I knew how to do, all of my upbringing from teaching fifth grade Sunday school to being an assistant manager at Baskin Robbins. I used everything I had to convince folks. Nobody's going to agree with their boss on everything. Nobody's going to agree with President Trump on everything. There's no requirement to do that. The requirement is that you execute, make the case, make the argument, and then take the president, who's the duly elected leader. He got 270 electoral votes. I got 0. And by the way, President Trump would remind me of that from time to time.
Right.
By the way, appropriately so. And make sure we're executing on his mission. And when I saw some of the others not do that, I tried to convince them, find a way. You got to find a way forward. Some of them were able to do it. Others just simply couldn't.
I'll give you an example. For example, Marco Rubio. Obviously, he and the president locked horns, got very personal. But he just said the president gave me a lot of latitude. He listened in Venezuela, Cuba, policy, South America. He was able to do it. Liz Cheney, a conservative like you, but she couldn't budge. In the beginning, she'd suck it up a little bit. Obviously, there's no greater critic than Liz Cheney of the president of the United States. How did you view it? Did you see that relationship with you?
You mean with
Liz Cheney and the president?
Yeah,
she would use you to kind of broker.
No, I wasn't in the middle of that. Look, I'd known Liz not well, but known her a little bit. She had happened to her what happened to a handful of other conservative folks, right? The Bill Kristols, Jennifer Rubins, but they popped a gasket about their mind was blown by Donald Trump. The idea that somehow we were working against America, right? They got caught up in the Russia hoax theory. They got caught up. The truth of the matter is we delivered really good outcomes. And that's what I tried to convince when I was interacting with people on Capitol Hill, whether it was Senator Rubio or Senator Graham or Senator Risch or Senator Menendez or whomever, like help us execute this mission. And if you can't separate the noise from the signal, if you can't put your helmet on every day and just get after it, then you're in the wrong place.
Do you? So having said all that, let's look at some world leaders. Obviously, you looked at Iran as the main problem in the Middle East, which Saudi Arabia appreciated because their rivalry was unveiled when all those communiques came out. From my view, because I'm an outsider, when those communiques came out because of WikiLeaks, you saw the rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran right there front and center. So by you being tough on Iran, it helped the relationship with Saudi Arabia and the Sunni community, having said that. So you put the screws to them, and I remember General Keane coming in. They've never seen anything like this. I've never seen them so on their heels. I've never seen them so unable to figure out what the next step was since after the first invasion of Iraq, and you guys took them down right away. Yeah. So you said we got to get out of this deal, and you get out of this deal. What do you think of where Iran is now as compared to where you left them?
Goodness. If you're the regime in Iran, you feel emboldened because you now know that the United States is going to try and cut a deal with you at almost any cost. The last time you dealt with folks like this, they sent you a bunch of money they sent pallets of cash. Look, they're having problems with their own people as a result of the destitute poverty that is being inflicted on them because they're looting so much money, the theocracy. But make no mistake about it, Iran was never so isolated as January 20th, 2021 when we left. They'd gone from $96 billion to $4 billion of foreign exchange reserves. I spent a lot of time in my book talking about the fact that, the foreign policy establishment, the blob, would have never taken a strike on Qasem Soleimani. and yet it was a game changer for America's
Were you
place.
for it?
I was probably the foremost advocate. I was the one who went down to brief President Trump. I write about this in Never Give an Inch on December 29th of 2019, just before the pandemic. We'd been talking to him about it. We were about to lose deterrence, Brian. Soleimani was trying to kill Americans, even as I was sitting there in Mar-a-Lago, and we needed to stop it. And we had
in Iraq.
In Iraq, we had the tools to do it. We knew that he was traveling from from Beirut to Damascus to Baghdad. And the president made the bold decision to allow this strike to go forward. We changed the course of history. And ultimately, that strike, along with a bunch of good work by Secretary Mnuchin, Jared Kushner, me, and some on my team, we delivered peaceful relations between 4 countries and the nation of Israel. Those are all deeply connected ideas.
The president let you get aggressive on ISIS. Let you go to rip the whole caliphate, the idea of a caliphate and the possibility out, and take out Soleimani. And because of that, they want to kill you, right? There's a death threat on you.
That's right. You saw me walk in this morning. I've got a big security team. The Iranians have made clear that they view me as the principal architect of the death of Soleimani and are actively trying to come after me. There was an unsealed indictment the other day that said there was a bounty on my head for $1 million. Originally, Brian, my wife thought that was low. but I think I forgot to take the trash out or something. She, thought maybe a GoFundMe campaign or something.
Right.
It's serious stuff, Brian, but you have to know that we did the right thing that day. It was a righteous strike. It deterred Iran. Remember, they were firing rockets at our embassy in Iraq. The Iranians were firing rockets at our embassy in Iraq almost every day. We shut it all down. And sadly, the Biden administration now is playing footsie with the Iranians again. That is bad news for Israel and for America.
So you tell them, and you don't still reveal, that you have this thing to make sure Iran doesn't have undue influence in these Iraqi elections. And you're briefing Durbin and you're briefing Schiff on this. And Adam Schiff says, you can't do that. And then Dick Durbin says, what would the New York Times say?
It was disgusting. I wrote as much about this as I could in the book. The book had to be cleared by the CIA, so I didn't get to tell the whole story here. But Never Give an Inch outlines the deep misunderstanding of America's place in the world. We weren't trying to undo the Iraqi elections. We were trying to confront the Iranians there who were trying to kill us. And Senator Durbin says something about what would the New York Times say? Like, that's the last thought that's ever crossing my mind. That's so deeply un-American to think about what the New York Times say. What would the parents of those children say, of those soldiers say, if they were killed? That's what concerned me.
Yeah, how about the fact that why go into Iraq, have the surge work, Obama throw in the street, ISIS come back, and then with Iraq actually saying, we want the U.S.'s help here, why would you abandon them and hand it over to Iran? It makes no sense.
It was incomprehensible to me. And it was incomprehensible as a policy matter that we would do that. And then to think, oh my gosh, we're worried about what the Washington Post and New York Times might say. It just showed an absence of seriousness about protecting America.
Okay, let's talk about NATO. They say, well, America's back. President Biden keeps saying America's back. And look at how united NATO is. But we can't get Germany to send their tank. Unless we send tanks first.
Right.
So where do you stand on this? And now there might be permission for for Poland to send German tanks in. How do you explain this timidity?
Europe has a long history of under-securing themselves, and we were tough on the Europeans. But when we say Europe, I should be more specific. On France and Germany, 2 big economies capable of spending money on their own defense, and they just for 40 years haven't done it. Brian, I start the book with some stories about when I was a young soldier. There I was, 22 years old, patrolling the East German border, running up and down the border in my M1 tank, which, by the way, as a 22-year-old, there's nothing much more fun than running up and down the border in an M1 tank.
Blowing up wooden tanks,
I will concede that. Blowing up wooden tanks, there's nothing much more fun than that. But where were the German kids doing that same work? Where were the French kids? Where were the Belgian kids doing that same work? And so when I became CIA director and Secretary of State, President Trump and I just kept imploring them, telling the Germans, this will end badly. If you depend on Russian energy for your energy, we don't know how it's going to end. I couldn't have predicted this, but it's going to end badly. And here it is. And even today, now with the threat of a Russian invasion of all of Europe, the Germans are reluctant to send extra vehicles that they have. It's incomprehensible.
Would you send our M1A1? The word is they use jet fuel and they're hard to train people on. That's what we hear. But Secretary of Defense Austin left the meeting with no deal. And we know the Russians are beginning to move offensively through the winter and planning on a big push in the spring.
I would send all the equipment the Ukrainians need.
Right now.
Right now. Every tool that they need, we should provide them. That includes intelligence, information sharing, things that we know about targets that they can go attack. Brian, every day this goes on, there are more Ukrainian civilians killed. And every day this goes on, the risk that Putin does something even stupider than he's already done. That impacts us here at home. It's not just a fight in Europe. It's about our lives here in America. And we should move to end this on terms that make sure that this doesn't happen again 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years from now.
Well, people just say, well, it's a war we don't have to, we shouldn't be involved in, and it's Zelensky leads a corrupt government. How do we know where our money's going? You've heard the pushback on this, and Republicans are
mostly
digging
in my own party.
In the House, yeah. And they want to, nobody is against an audit. Evidently, Deloitte is auditing things. So what do you say to Republicans, conservatives like you, who are not thrilled with writing checks with a $32 trillion debt and our border wide open?
These are not mutually exclusive ideas. In the Trump administration, we closed our southern border. I write about my role in that as Secretary of State and never give an inch. You can close the southern border and deter Putin's aggression. It's not like you can do one or the other. And sometimes I hear my Republican friends, good people, say, well, we should close our border. But well, let's just go do them both. We have to assist the Ukrainians. They haven't asked for the 82nd Airborne. They didn't ask for a Marine Rifle Regiment. They just asked for stuff. We should make sure it gets to the right place. No one denies that Ukraine has corruption inside the most senior levels of its government. That is all true. But we can provide them with the tools they need to fight and win a war against an invasion of Europe by Vladimir Putin.
This Wagner group is about 50,000 guys, a lot of them criminals. They are private contractors, essentially. They are leading the charge, and they are dismissive of the Russian forces, who are lightly trained and lightly equipped, evidently. That mix of forces, as a West Point guy that studied, goes to war college, what do you think?
Yeah, the Wagner guys present an interesting business proposition for Vladimir Putin. These are paid mercenaries, essentially, taking the place of the Russian army. This is not new to me. We saw Wagner in Syria. Never Give an Inch. In the book, I tell a story about where the Wagner guys were coming across the Euphrates River. It was late at night, Washington time, and we killed 300 of them. We deterred them. This is what I think the Biden administration doesn't get. I think they would have said, oh my gosh, the Russians are coming across. If we attack them, they'll do World War III. There was no World War III. They knew we were serious, Brian.
That's it. And you talk about even our founding fathers knew it's a tough world. And wrote about it in the Federalist Papers. Mean, nasty world. And if you don't understand, if you don't fight for that, that's the world we're going to have. We have to fight. That's why we need a strong defense. And that's fundamentally what is Mike Pompeo's core. It's in Never Give an Inch. Well, a few more minutes with the former Secretary of State in just a moment.
To your ears, it's Brian Kilmeade.
I know you think you've heard it all. You've seen the books and you saw the administration. You see the hit books and the plus books when it comes to the Trump administration. But Never Give an Inch is totally different. It gives you a perspective as a former CIA director and Secretary of State who never talked to Donald Trump before he got a call from Mike Pence said, would you consider joining the administration, who supported Marco Rubio. And Mr. Secretary, before we get into China, which you think is the number one nemesis of this country, obviously, the decision to have your son write the forward. What is that like? I've never seen that before.
No, it's unusual. The book's unusual that way. So it's a story about our 4 years, but it's also a story about family and American decency. And so my son said, oh, you're going to write a book? I want to do the forward. Like, done. My son, he did a lot of good things to keep me going and keep me humble when I was a Secretary of State. So the least I could do is give him a few pages in the book. It
is a sacrifice for your family because you're never home. I mean, Thanksgiving, you find yourself in North Korea.
Yeah, and the security stuff impacts them too.
Dennis Rodman, was he an asset to your North Korea intelligence operation?
Dennis Rodman was the record holder for time with Chairman Kim before I came along.
So he was a help.
He'd spent a lot of time there. He was the coach of the North Korean basketball team, if you can imagine all things. And then remember, the president has a relationship with him because he's on The Apprentice. So small world. And he said, talk to him before noon because he's either drunk or high. That's right. Right. That's one of the great stories from the book. Right. And fun stories, right? Absolutely. Yeah. So for China in particular, do you believe they purposely inflicted this virus on the world? Yes, I do. They knew they had a lethal virus on their hands in the fall of 19. So think about this. It doesn't really come to the United States until the beginning of 20. So by September, October of 19, they knew they had a lethal virus that was highly contagious, relatively lethal virus. And instead of doing the right thing, sharing that with the world, getting the best scientists in, solving the problem, they put tens of thousands of people on airplanes traveling the world.
So you don't think they created the virus to do this, but once the virus was created,
that's right.
You think they spread it?
This leaked from the lab, almost certainly. So that wasn't intentional. But once it was out and they knew what they had, they did nothing to stop its spread.
Well, right now they're being killed by their own virus. They started with a zero COVID policy. It had riots in their streets. We know their economy only grew at 3%. Do you think is this how they game planned it out?
I don't think they thought it all the way through. I think in the moment they concluded, we cannot open our books. We can't let the Americans in or the world's best scientists in to see what happened because they will find that this leaked from our lab. And so they said, just go to ground, go dark. They did go dark. And then they put people on airplanes to places like Milan, Italy, and millions of people are dead as a result of that decision.
And now they're experiencing something.
And now they're experiencing
and they got the worst vaccine in the world, ineffective, and because they have no immunity, you would argue. They now are, sadly, they're dying because their government could care less about their people.
That's right. I take no joy in this, but this is, you nailed it, Brian. This is because the leadership in China doesn't care about humans one bit.
You gave it 100%. You grinded this book out. It's of great detail and interest. You're going to love it. It's called Never Give an Inch. Mike Pompeo, congratulations.
Thank you, Brian.
And thanks for the quality hour.
Thank you. It was fun to be with you.
Yeah, and we'll see you all over the show. See you on Jesse tonight.
Thanks.